Hello and welcome to another episode of Unboxed. This is our book club Wednesday. We're going to be looking at chapter 4, Tearing Down and Building Up. So stay tuned. I'm Dr. Robert Davis, family life educator and relationship coach. And welcome to Unboxed, a frank and straightforward conversation about relationships. We're going to talk about family, church, workplace, and all other types of relationships. Join me for the next few moments as we unbox the power and potential of relationships and help you to live your best life. All right, everyone, welcome back. I'm Dr. Robert Davis, and I want to welcome you to Unbox, our Wednesday night virtual book club. I want to ask you to like, subscribe, and to share. Again, like, subscribe, and share. And also visit our website so that you can become a supporter of Unboxed. I want to also encourage you to get your own personal copy of the book that we're going through today. It's called Seasoned with Grace, God's Recipe for Healthy Family Communication. We're looking at chapter 4. It's called Tearing Down and Building Up. I'm glad to have with me, as always, my beautiful wife, Denise Davis, as well as another lovely person in my family, Mitchie. She's my sister. So I have to be on my P's and Q's because both of them know how I communicate, and they can call me to the carpet if I ain't acting right. All right, we're going to jump right into this. These last few weeks, we've been talking about specifics of family communication as it relates to husband and wife. And we said that when husbands and wives communicate with each other, the husband needs to communicate love and support and nurturing. And when the wife communicates, she needs to communicate respect to the husband. And the great thing that we learned about all of this is you get to choose who you're going to marry. So don't put the focus on whether or not I should respect or whether or not I should cherish my wife. Put the focus on, I want to make sure I marry somebody that I can respect, and I want to make sure I marry somebody who I can cherish. Then last week, we talked about parent-child communication. And we looked at how the Bible says that children are to show respect to their parents because there is a hierarchy in the parent-child relationship. And then we talked about how parents' communication is supposed to train, nurture, and admonish children to build them up and to inspire them. And we even talked about how parents and children can work together to develop plans and goals for the children's life in cooperation so that discipline is not about punishing a child, but rather discipline becomes about working toward a particular goal. And so we've gone through an awful lot, and today we're going to get right into chapter 4, Tearing Down and Building Up. This chapter looks at how family communication and the power of family communication is able to tear down as well as to build up the family. So let me just jump in for a moment here. So good to see Mitchie and Denise and Mickey. So glad to have each of you here. Let's jump right into this. The author talks about how family plans, goals, and strategies are impossible to implement without family communication. What are some reasons couples and families find it difficult to communicate and develop plans together? And I want you to begin thinking in your own personal experience, etc. What have you seen as to reasons why families have difficult times communicating and developing plans together? And it don't have to necessarily be from your own personal experience. It could be from something that you've observed. All right, everybody's quiet at the same time. Do I got to call on folk? All right, you weren't here last week, Mitchie, so I'm calling on you.
Good
evening. I would say one thing in my personal experience that would make it difficult to plan with family is sometimes past hurts that haven't been communicated well. And so that would be one thing that I can think of. Certain family members that you may not, you may have, some hurtful past interactions that you may be afraid to, or more insecure about having more family gatherings with them.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, in situations where there has been hurt in the past, it becomes more challenging to have that open, transparent communication as you move forward.
Right.
Okay. Denise, what are some of your thoughts around this as it relates to family communication? And we know that there are too many couples. I won't say a lot, but there's just too many couples who are unable to communicate. Too many families that are unable to communicate and to plan together. That's a huge thing. We talked about this last week, especially as it relates to parents and children. That whole planning together and developing strategies on how to improve the family financially, spiritually, and every other lead that you can think about. What are some of those hindrances to families being able to and finding difficulty communicating and planning together?
I think I'm driving, so I might be cutting in and out. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you very well.
Yeah, I think well, I don't think, but I know it comes from being a child and how much the family was able to share growing up. Because I know for me, my family was a little bit more open when it comes to planning and doing things. And, you know, my dad being the provider, he would sit with my mom. They'll try to come up with, you know, budget, how to spend money. So that was something that was instilled in me from a child. But then I realized that with my partner, that's not so. So then it makes it hard. Like, I guess the family dynamics was, you know, you do what you do. Everything was private. Everything was a secret. So so I think it has to do with how you were brought up and how open that communication and planning, because kids practice what they see.
So in situations where one spouse comes from a family that's more open, especially around their plans, their goals, and things of that nature, and then you have someone else who comes from a family where it's more secretive, everybody kind of is doing their own thing, it's more challenging for those two individuals to come together and to really be able to establish some kind of a communication system within the family.
That's correct.
All right, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm understanding. Denise, you want to weigh in on this, or are you ready to move on?
I was thinking my first answer was exactly what Mitchie said, and I didn't hear some of it, but what I can gather is the fact that personalities, past hurts, with experiences. So even with your current partner, if you've experienced roadblocks and frustrations and arguments, one tends to shut down and not keep trying. So I think that's one barrier to me that impedes communication and planning. I'm always of the philosophy that, yes, we were raised one way as children, but as we grow and get older, we have to be intentional about improving ourselves. And so I'm not saying that that's not a factor, but I think as we become adults, we become more intentional whether or not we're going to change. And so I think it weighs more on past experiences to me with that particular person you're trying to communicate with. Does that make sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. What I'm really hearing here, and I'd be interested in hearing from someone else. What I'm hearing is, or rather, what's coming to my mind as I'm listening to each of you, is that as we begin to form our own families, one of the things we have to ask ourselves is what was taught, learned, and kind of just picked up in my family of origin about how communication is supposed to take place.
Yes, and we need to be intentional about what we want to carry on, what legacy we want to continue. Intentionality.
Wow, that's a very strong and loaded word. Intentionality. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Intentionality, but just about the roadblocks that we run into and that we've seen others run into around communication. You know, one of the things that I've seen and others have seen as well is kind of, you know, when your ideas and suggestions, and this kind of goes to what Mitchie was saying, when your ideas and suggestions are shot down, and you know, every time you try to contribute, not every time, but you know, often when you try to contribute, the other your spouse or the other person withdraws or criticizes or dismisses your ideas, you almost become gun shy. That's I think I'm kind of picking up on what Mitchie was saying earlier, but you become gun shy, and you say, hey, I'm not sure if I want to put myself in this predicament.
Right.
Yes,
I was going to say,
absolutely.
go ahead.
Go ahead, Mitchie.
I was going to say, definitely, I was listening when she said, I think Denise said intentional. Yes, at some point, I definitely agree. At some point in your adult life, you have to ask yourself, why do I keep having these same sorts of problems or issues? And then you have to at some point say, is there something I can change or do differently? So, at some point you have to put focus on self and see if there's something that you can change about self.
And I've shared this a lot for those who watch the other episodes of Unboxed. They'll hear me say this, Mitchie. I refer to it as the Serenity Prayer 2.0, and it just simply says, Lord, grant me the serenity to accept that I cannot change other people, the courage to change the only person I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Many of us are familiar with the original Serenity Prayer. Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. So I just kind of personalize it. I can't change other people. And Lord, grant me the courage to change the only person that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And we're going to get a little bit into that. Again, for those of you who are tuning in right now, we are doing our book club. The book is Seasoned with Grace, God's Recipe for Healthy Family Communication. You can pick it up at Amazon. You can also pick it up at Google Books and other retailers, as well as Apple Books, etc. Seasoned with Grace, God's Recipe for Healthy Family Communications by Dr. Robert L. Davis. Page 57 of the book, we're looking at chapter 4, Tearing Down and Building Up. Page 57, and if you have your book with you, you can look at it, makes this statement. I'm going to read it if you don't mind. It says, but when I say always be considerate and always be communicating, and let me back up for a second. In the book, we talk about two things that help us to become better communicators, and you can remember them because they both are with the acronym ABC. Always be communicating, always be considerate. So when I say always be considerate and always be communicating, I'm talking about the need to be thoughtful as we communicate with our family. Another way we can say the ABCs is always be conscientious. That's a pretty big one. Always be conscientious. The most important element that we bring into healthy family communication is for us to think. And this is hitting on what you're talking about, Mitchie, for us to think as we communicate. And so let me throw this question out there. And again, this is page 57 of the book, Seasoned with Grace. Let me throw this question out there. Why do you believe it's difficult or it can be difficult to be thoughtful and conscientious in family communication? Why do you believe it can be difficult to be thoughtful and conscientious? What are some of those things that make it? I know we talked about it just a little bit ago, but what are some of those things that can make it difficult to be thoughtful and conscientious in family communication?
I think one thing would be our passions. When our passions are high, when our emotions are at its highest, and we're not as logical in our thinking, then of course, our mouths can go ahead of our brains.
The mouths going ahead of the brain. Wow, that's a powerful way of putting it. Mitchie, you were about to say something.
I was going to say, I guess it kind of correlates to what Denise is saying, but I was going to say a lot of times you're thinking of self actually, and you are in defense of self in times like that, I think. And it's hard to become thoughtful of what you're saying when you're in defense mode. Especially like, for instance, when we said there was past hurts or anything like that have not been resolved. And then you come together with family. And so now you're in defense mode. So now you're you're speaking in for yourself and rather than thinking of the other person.
When I talk to someone, I say, when you're talking with someone, they'll tell you, I remember when I learned to ride a bike. I remember when I baked my first cake or whatever it may be. I remember when I first learned or started learning to play a particular instrument. They can kind of pinpoint where they picked up a certain skill set. You ask someone, when did you first learn how to communicate? Not just when did you first develop words. We know that happens, around 1 year of age. When did you actually start learning how to communicate? And people will be like, man, I'm not sure. Oh, but the truth of the matter is, we have been taught how to communicate. And the more that you do something, not only when you're not able to trace how you learn to do something, but when you've been doing something for so long, a particular way, and you are in the pattern of doing it, it becomes natural. So, for instance, not only natural, but predictable. So if someone says this to you with this tone and this volume, boom, it's automatically going to generate a response. You get that automatic response. Is anybody here following me? If you're following me, give me a thumbs up or something. Let me know that you're following me. It's that I get it. I mean, I've been doing this for so long that I've just become accustomed to communicating, to responding, to interacting a particular way. And back to something that both Denise and Mitchie said, you become thoughtless. So rather than becoming thoughtful, we become thoughtless. And so I want to take for a moment, and I want to put both of you on the spot. If you had to describe how you were taught to communicate, how would you describe it? Because I remember how I was taught to ride a bike. They held the back of the seat, the back of that big long banana boat seat that I was on, and I was riding a Murray bike. Murray. Some of y'all don't even remember Murray. I was riding a Murray bike, and I was getting it. And then they let go of the back of the seat. It was my mother who taught me how to ride a bike. My mother was holding the back of the seat, and then I just took off down the road, and I've been going ever since. But how did you learn to communicate? Denise, let me start with you because since I'm the one that's got to live with you, I want to know, how did you learn to communicate? You gonna answer this?
Oh, you got jokes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you asked the question, the first thing came to my mind was interacting with my cousins in Jamaica, not necessarily interacting with adults. I learned to communicate in very formal.
Let me jump in here just for a second for all of our those who are watching and listening. This just has mischievous written all over it. She and her cousins used to do the most mischievous things when they were little. I just want to make sure that everybody knows that they were some mischievous Jamaican kids running around, climbing mango trees, throwing stuff down to each other, apples, and all kind of other. But then they would just do foolishness. And anyway, go ahead. I got sidetracked.
But I think in Jamaica we learned culturally, you learn how to communicate two ways. Formally with adults, how you speak to adults, how you speak to your teachers, how you speak day to day in more formal setting. You speak the Queen's English and you're more intentional with your diction. When you're around, of course, your cousins and people of your own age, your language gets looser. Communication wise, you're less guarded as well. And so you say any old thing. And I'm not necessarily mean cursing. I just mean that your inhibitions are a lot less. And so you may threaten. And I'm just thinking about when I was a child, we used to threaten each other a lot. We used to crack jokes, tease each other a lot. We just have these nonverbals that we look at each other and we know what the other person's thinking or what we should do. We learned how to band together and hide things from the adults together. So I think that my first lesson in communication was with my cousins, my family. I have to think a little bit more on how to answer that question deeper. But
I'm gonna throw up what Kevin said. Kevin, who's also a yardie, he says, I learned how to communicate from my older sister, books, and other conversations. That's my yardie right there.
But ask Kevin if he would agree with me that we learn how to communicate in two different simultaneously in two different ways.
I am sure that he would definitely concur with that. I want to before I come to Mitchie, I want to kind of throw this little caveat. How did you learn to communicate? Who taught you? Let me put it that way. Mitchie, you still are on the first question, but I want to just kind of put this in your mind. Who taught you how you're supposed to communicate from an emotional perspective? And Kevin says, I agree with you 100%, Denise. All right. But yes, who taught you how to communicate as it relates to emotions and from an emotional perspective? That just have that in your mind, Mitchie, as you're going to begin answering the question, which is how did you learn to communicate?
Who taught me? Who was my first memory of learning how to communicate? I would have to say my mother.
Okay.
My mother was very much, she taught us to be ladies, my sister and I to be ladies. And so you always carry yourself in a ladylike manner. And you speak to your elders very ladylike, and and to me, I'm thinking about it now, and it's really sad now because I'm thinking, oh, I was raised to be such a lady and to speak a certain way when people ask you things. And now I'm thinking about it wrong. I was like, wait a minute, I was taught to lie. I was not that I wasn't a lady, but when someone asks you, don't say, how are you doing today, or just random example, and you're going to give a ladylike answer to say, I'm doing very well, thank you. Although you just got to fight with your sibling in the backseat of the car and you're mad and angry, but if an elder asks you something, you have to be a lady about it. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, wait a minute. I think I was taught to lie. But those are my first memories of communication. I'm thinking, right? That was the first thing that came up to me off the top of my head was my mother.
You're just a little Southern belle. I can hear it in your voice. You're just a little Southern belle. I don't know. Even though you're my sister, and I know that this didn't happen, I just have this picture of you on the swing in the middle of the summer underneath a huge oak tree, and you have on one of those 18th century dresses, and you're swinging back and forth, fanning yourself. I just have this total
wait a minute
antebellum South appearance.
The picture you have of me is climbing and falling out of trees with my cousins throwing down fruit to me.
And you fighting. I have a picture of you fighting your boy cousins.
There were a lot
and
of that,
threatening
yes.
them. And I have a picture of you chasing them around the yard at Top Hill in Manchester with a machete.
Yes. Yeah, that's because I told you the stories.
And the picture of my sister is her just being this little dainty young lady. Even though I know that was not. Even though I know she was raised in a large city. Nashville is a huge city, but that's still a picture that I have of her. But I want to go just deeper. Then we're gonna move forward. I want to go just a little bit deeper on this because I want even our viewers and listeners to think about this, and that is emotionally. Like, how did you learn to respond when various emotional things happen? Because I can think, and I told you that Mitchie and I are sisters. Brother and sister. So, she talked about her mother. I want to talk about my mother for a second. What I was taught was, to fight fire with fire. Somebody cusses you, you cuss them back out. Somebody says something insulting to you, you say something insulting to them. I was not taught, even though I was raised in a Christian home, I was not really taught from a communication perspective to turn the other cheek. Don't let folks run over you, take advantage of you. These are the type of communication. And I can't remember the first time I remember it. I do remember my first fight and what I was told. I got in a fight with this boy named Cowboy. Real quick story. Got in a fight with this boy named Cowboy. That was his nickname. And what used to happen, those of you, all African-American boys know this, that the older kids in the neighborhood pit you to fight against each other when you're younger. So from the time I have memory up until I was around 12, 13, almost all my fights was because older kids made us fight. Well, anyway, with that being said, Cowboy punched me in the face and I started crying. And my brothers were so disappointed in me. And when I went home, I'll never forget, you expect to walk in the house and for your mom to comfort and console you, be like, oh, it's okay. She was like, you better not ever let nobody punch you in the face and you don't fight back. You better go out there right now and do this, that, and the other. And I was like, oh, that didn't go like I thought it would. I remember that. My first fight was Cowboy. So I want to ask as you think about this, who taught you how to respond, how to interact communication-wise from an emotional perspective? Did anyone sit down and say, listen, I know you're upset. This is how you respond. This is how you do this. This is how you do the other.
No, I can't. That's the short answer for me. But I have an intentional to make sure I teach that to my children, to literally sit down and situation by situation, teach them. And then when they do fall into emotional reactivity, show them that as an example. What is a better way that you could have reacted? What results are you trying to get? So for me, the short answer is no, I was not taught, but I've made sure I've taught my children.
Profound. So yeah, Mitzi, you talked about who taught you how to be a lady. Who taught you how to communicate from an emotional perspective? How do you respond when you're upset? How do you collect your thoughts? How do you create a positive environment? We'll talk about that just through your communication. Who taught you those skills?
Okay. So as an adult, I've had to rewire myself because I realized what I was taught was not effective in my own home. But I can say that my mother and father had two very different communication styles. So my father taught me to express myself, that you should express what you're feeling, whether you need to tell someone or you can write it in a diary, or, always get it out. And he was very loving in his communication. My mother, on the other hand, in public, I have to say this, just being honest, in public, we had to respond like ladies and gentlemen. And we were at home, you can show every anger and every emotion you have, and you can let it loose and let it flow. And so, if someone makes you upset within your family at home, you can let them have it. Versus, in public, like I said, you had to respond like a lady. So, unfortunately, you bring that into adulthood, you can't, it's too contrasting. So that doesn't really work. So as an adult, I found myself having to rewire everything or undo everything that I've learned and relearn communication, because it just doesn't work.
Wow.
It's funny how it appears that all Black cultures are alike, and that may be a very, very general statement. But as you're talking, Chi-Chi, even as you guys were talking earlier, I think that a lot of the communication that we've learned is cultural. Even in Jamaica, those same things that you're taught here, we're taught there. Fighting back, defending yourself, making sure no one walks over you. And even just now, as you were saying, let it out at home, but don't bring your stuff in the street. That's exactly what we were taught. And I would say that my learning of communication was by observation and how the adults in my life at the time when I was younger, how they reacted to each other when they didn't agree. Right. Sometimes they let each other have it, and then there are other times when they'll stop speaking to each other. And as I got older in my teenage years, I would just drop people, and they wouldn't even know they got dropped. And I can live in my head even into an adulthood. I can live in my head. I make my plans in my head. I communicate with myself without necessarily involving other people. But when I got married and I had to form a family of my own, my husband is a talker. And so I was forced to talk and let it out and express yourself,
Right.
no matter how late at night it was.
You know, as I think about my community, not just my family, but the entire community that I was raised in, I would describe the general attitude as angry, and it was everyone was frustrated, tired, angry, and just fed up. You know, that was kind of like the sentiment, and perhaps it's an East Coast thing because there's a certain atmosphere once I get into the beltway of DC. And it's even more pronounced when you go to New York City. There's just this atmosphere where everyone is uptight. But as you get really just not in the car, but into your very specific community, everyone, and I know everyone is an overgeneralization and that doesn't apply, so just bear with me. But it just seemed as if everyone was angry. And can I be honest with you, Denise? When I interact with Jamaicans, and that's why I think you may be onto something about a cultural thing. You know, when I interact with Jamaicans, it seems like to a large part, many are just angry and just waiting for somebody to say something the wrong way at the wrong time. And that's kind of how the community is. I wish somebody would, you know. I wish I would. You know, just always look for something. Yeah.
I hope you didn't, just so that I can.
Yeah, we were laughing the other day about that. The person would rather fight than to get their money. Like, when I get over there, I hope you don't have my money. Well, why would you? Because that means that you have to fight. Now, wouldn't you prefer to have your money than to have a fight? But so anyway, I'm just thinking about some of the communication. And the reason that I'm going through this is because I'm hoping again that the listeners and viewers are picking up on the importance of kind of getting an idea of where we learned how to communicate. And we're not just talking about English and diction and correct pronunciation and all those things. We're talking about where did you learn how to communicate within emotional situations and within relationships when they become more tense, more conflictual, and things of that nature. You know, where did you pick that up? And as we begin to trace that, even though this is not in the book, as we begin to trace that, it helps us to identify so we can begin to make the necessary changes. So
I'm sorry, Dr.
Go ahead,
Davis.
please.
I'm glad you said that because I know that we're having a discussion and it requires us to not necessarily think too deeply, but to answer. But I think this is worth going back and really digging deep and thinking about our earliest memories of watching the adults in our lives or even communicating or thinking about an early conversation that we've had with people or early emotional reaction that we've had with someone or something. And just kind of digging deep into that to find out how that has traced and followed us all the way into adulthood and even now. So I think it requires a lot more thought than we can give it, within the few moments that we have here.
So I love the way that you put that, looking not only at what I was directly taught, but even what I observed as to way to other individuals communicated, whether it was husbands and wives or whatever it may be. How did they communicate? How did, what did I observe? What did I pick up? What did I learn? I think that's very important. I want to jump to page 58. On page 58, it says this right here. The true science to having strong, healthy family communication happens when we attempt to improve ourselves and the way we communicate. The true science to having strong, healthy family communication happens when we attempt to improve ourselves and the way we communicate. We just hit on a few of them, but I want us to think through some more. How does a person improve themselves to have healthier communication? How does a person improve themselves? We just hit on a few of it, talking about tracing back. Excuse me. What are some other ways that a person improves themselves?
Well, I think you started discussing that on page 49,
Mm-hmm.
going forward about being considerate. and the emotional reactivity. Practicing life, not withdrawing from difficult communication or conversations, but embracing those opportunities to do better.
So embracing the opportunities to do better. Mitchie, let me throw this at you. How does a person improve themselves to have healthier communication?
Let me speak from personal experience, since it's the only way I know to speak from right now. I would say, in my personal experience, when you have had the same outcome with people and the outcome is not always a positive one, or you're wanting to receive a better outcome. I don't want to say not positive, but a better outcome. And so like I said earlier, I said that at some point you have to look at self and see, what can I do differently to get a better outcome than what I've been getting? I mean, I don't know how any other way to change an outcome, but to see what you can change, because like you said, you can't change other people. What can I do differently to get a better outcome?
I was going to also say, make it a habit to speak with intention, especially in an argument.
Let me throw this in there.
I'm sorry, Pastor Davis again. I know that there have been times earlier in our marriage when we both have to stop and pause and say, okay, what I'm trying to say is, and I know my nature was like, say it the way you were going to say it. What were you going to say? But I mean, that's a joke, but I think that we have to be intentional. We have to be intentional about what we say and how we say it and the words we use.
I remember that. I'm just going to throw this out there for everyone. I remember that earlier in our marriage, and I'd be very conscientious about what I want to say. And I would stop myself mid-sentence so that I could choose my words better, because I knew what I was about to say. And she'd be like, no, what were you about to say? I'm like, but what I was about to say was going to do nothing but provoke and fan the flame.
I want to hear it.
Already 10 cents. She's like, nah, say it. I'm like, no, I don't want to. I'm making a decision not to say it. And so she'd be ready to jump on me, boy. I'm telling you. But and y'all know me.
I think
I'm the most innocent. Experiences. Say that again, Mitchie.
I was saying, I think we all have had similar experiences.
And everyone who knows me knows that I am just the most gentle, easygoing guy. Never get my feathers ruffled. I mean, just the salt of the earth. Denise, what is that song that you sing all the time? What is my theme? What is the theme song for my life?
With Papi Sean and gang.
No, Lord, it's hard to be humble. You're perfect in every way.
I do sing several songs in his presence to poke him.
But on a serious note, for those who know me, know that I'm a very animated and sometimes over the top. So I'm still working on that. And you can imagine when you throw in a good family argument where I end up landing in that whole process. But one of the things that I was thinking about was, when we talk about improving ourselves, when we know that we're going to be in a conflictual conversation, or we're going to enter into an argument, because sometimes you just know, I have to talk to this person about this subject. It's probably going to rile them up. What are the things to do? Two things. One is to pre-plan. In other words, this is what good football teams do, and good basketball teams, etc. They watch the film and they develop a plan. So they develop a plan on how they're going to enter into the game. The next thing they do is they watch film to see what they did wrong in previous games or when they played that team the last time. So they do two things. They say, okay, what did I do wrong the last time? I need to work on improving myself so that I don't make those same mistakes. And they go through step by step to see where they were out of position, where they were, where there was miscues or whatever. And then they begin to say, okay, this is what we're going to do different the next go round. The next go round, we're going to do A, B, C, and D. And so I would recommend that individuals do that. If you have a chance, mentally go through the tape and see what happened. And then second of all, pre-plan. How are you going to communicate in the future? What words are you going to use? What volume, what tone, when are you going to pull back? When are you going to hold your ground? All those different things, practice it out. How are you going to do it? Because that really does bring us into a place of intentional. Because, and this is last point on that. The more we communicate intentionally, the better we become at communicating. Anyone can pick up drumsticks and just start banging. Anyone can just get on the piano and go gling, 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 blang, 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 blang. But when you start playing the piano or the drum or any other instrument with intentionality, I want to learn how to play this thing correctly and skillfully. Just that mental energy of doing that helps to move you to the next level. The same thing with communication. The mental exercise of saying, I want to communicate better, and I'm going to practice being a better communicator, moves you to that next level. This book is God's recipe for healthy family communication, seasoned with grace. So let's look at a few of God's recipes. I want us to look at the book of James. James chapter 1, verse 26. And then we're going to look at James chapter 3, verses 2 through 10. And I would like to read a newer translation if you have that. James chapter 1, verse 26, and James chapter 3, verses 2 through 10. Who'll be so kind enough to read those two passages for us so that our viewers could hear that this is God's recipe for healthy family communication. And I want us to think about when family members that we're with become combative and argumentative, when they begin to start using words that stir up conflict. I want us to think about how the Bible talks about how we can avoid, giving in and avoid becoming a part of that toxic cycle. James chapter 1, verse 26, as well as James chapter 3, verse 2 through 10. Who will read that for me? Anybody?
James chapter 1, verse 26.
Somebody? Anybody? Everybody?
Did you say 126?
Yeah, James chapter 1, verse 26.
Okay, if anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless.
Wow. That's a very powerful statement, isn't it? If you can't bridle your tongue, then your religion is worthless.
Yeah.
If you can't, James chapter 3, while you're doing that, Mitchie, can you read James chapter 3, verses 2 through 10 as well?
James chapter 3, verses 2 through 10.
Yes, please.
For we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be so.
Wow, that just punched me right there in the chest.
Yeah, it is. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That thing punched me dead smack in the chest. So as you listen to those two scriptures, what do they say to you regarding family communication? As you're listening to those, what do those scriptures say to you regarding family communication?
One of the things that jumped at me was something both Chichi and I said earlier with regards to letting it all out at home, but outside you're composed and you're kept together. My thing is that according to the Bible, that's the place you should keep it together. That's the place you should practice self-control. That's the place where your religion comes out. Because that's the place where your emotions are tied. And that's, to me, if you practice at home, they used to say in Jamaica, practice it at home. Whatever you do at home, you'll do abroad. And what James is saying, this is the perfect place to put your Christianity or put your religion in action and to perfect your religion.
Home is the perfect place to put your religion into practice. Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. Anyone else? James chapter 1, what do these scriptures in James chapter 3, what do these scriptures mean to you regarding family communication? I know for me, like I said, it was a punch in the chest because it says, every beast. And as I was listening to that, I thought about the killer whale. If you go down to SeaWorld, you can see, or I think they stopped doing it now, but up till a few years ago, you could see a killer whale jumping through a hula hoop. I mean, every fish of the sea has been tamed, but the tongue is the one thing that can't seem to be tamed. It is unruly. You see people putting their heads in the mouth of a lion and all kinds of other tricks. Bears fake wrestling and all of that stuff, but the tongue can't be tamed. And it really says to me that the energy that a person puts into taming animals is the same type of energy and focus and determination that we need to put into controlling how we communicate within families. Someone else, what do those scriptures mean?
I was going to say then, I don't think necessarily when he says tongue, he's not talking about the words we form and what we say, but it's controlling the emotions, controlling your mindset, controlling what goes in your heart, your thoughts.
Right.
Because it's those things that allows the tongue to say what it says.
Right.
Wow. I see that Nikki's back with us. You want to weigh in on this?
Yes, I am back. What I want to say is before we speak, we have to always think about what Jesus would do. Or if Jesus was standing in that room, like how would we handle certain situation? We would put more thought in it. We would choose our words, and we'd be more intentional about what we say and not say. And I think it's important when it comes to our partners or in our home, because Jesus is in our home. So what are we displaying to our partners? Because we are supposed to be that Jesus.
A lot of times when I'm doing pastoral counseling and stuff with individuals, the focus will be on what the spouse is doing. So, my spouse doesn't do this, my spouse doesn't do that, my spouse doesn't do the other. And one of the things, and I just, through a process, I get to is how can you be what you want to see in your spouse, whether your spouse is that person or not? So oftentimes our communication is predicated on how others communicate. So rather than us being the leader and in the driver's seat, we kind of are just passengers being taken along for the ride. They made me cuss them out. They made me do this. There's a video that I saw of a girl beating another girl in the middle of a drugstore, middle of a Rite Aid. And as she's raining blows on the girl, she says, "This is what you wanted. I'm just giving you what you wanted." Almost as if the other girl, even though the other girl was the one getting her face bashed in, I don't have the control of this situation. I am totally at your mercy to do what you want me to do. And I find that so amazing how we turn over our will and control to other people rather than being intentional about being in the driver's seat.
I, um, I was going to say, I totally agree because, for instance, I was thinking as I was reading that verse about every animal can be tamed, but you think about animals are tamed by someone else,
Yeah.
and yet the tongue cannot be tamed. You know, you are no one and nothing can tame your tongue and your heart but you. So you are in ultimate control of what you say, how you speak it, how you communicate. You are in complete control. And I think that's what I'm getting out of that, that no one can, you can't rely on others to help you um, communicate what you're trying to communicate. It has to be you and only you, looking at self.
I love that. One of the things, if you look at page 61, and while I'm about to read that, we're gonna close out our discussion today, looking at Second Timothy chapter 2. Denise, I'm going to ask you if you'll look at Second Timothy chapter 2, verses 23 and 24. And then I'm going to ask Mitchie if she'll read Philippians chapter 2, verse 14 and 15. So Denise, 2 Timothy 2, 23 through 24, and Philippians 2, 14 through 15. If you could read those. And as we're doing that, I just want to, as you're getting ready to read those, I want to say, page 61 of the book says, knowing who I am and how I communicate is the first step in becoming more positive and healthy in my communication. I just thought that kind of puts together a lot of what we've been talking about here. Knowing who I am and how I communicate is the first step in becoming more positive and healthy in my communication. Second Timothy, I want to talk a little bit about quarreling and bickering and arguing. Second Timothy chapter 2, verse 23 and 24. And I think, Denise, you were going to read that for us.
Have nothing to do with foolishness, ignorant controversies. You know that they breed quarrels. And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil.
And many times when we read that, we think about it from the context of do not get into theological debates with people. And that is true. You shouldn't get into a theological debate with someone. Teach, but not get into a debate. The Lord servant on debate. But that also has implications to family relationships and family communication. Philippians chapter 2, verse 14 and 15. And I think that's you, Mitchie.
Philippians chapter 2, you said 14 and 15?
Yes, please.
Let's see. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent children of God without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world.
You know, I think that scripture, Philippians, is so relevant now. Probably more relevant in social media age than ever in the history of the world, because now people become warriors behind their keyboards, and people say things they never would have said, publicly if they were face to face. People say some of the meanest, most unthoughtful, quarrelsome, bickering things that you'd ever want to hear. And I think that scripture really jumps out. So what does that scripture mean to you regarding arguing and this whole thing about needing to be right, getting people, telling somebody off, putting people in their place, speaking your mind, that whole concept? What does these scriptures say to you about, this modern way of, I'm going to speak my truth type thing? And my truth is you ain't worth a dime.
I don't necessarily think that's what the truth is, but I think that's conflating things. But in my experience, what I have learned, I guess, sitting under your tutelage, is just being able to identify what I'm able to contribute to this conversation, what I want to contribute, and what I'm able to contribute. And I know that sometimes I joke about being a defined self, so I'm not going to engage in certain things, but I really do take it to heart, whether I'm at work, whether I'm interacting with my family. And I literally say to myself, in spite of how this person is behaving or communicating with me, what am I prepared? How long am I prepared to engage in this exchange? What am I prepared to react to? And what am I prepared to do? And I just, in a kind and nice way, I respond, say what I need to say, and just leave the rest up to the other person and ignore the rest.
Wow, beautiful. What when you think about what we just read in Second Timothy and in the book of Philippians, what jumps out at you? What jumps out at you, and what does it mean to you as it relates to arguing and needing to be right in family communication? I'm opening this up to Mitchie and Mickey.
I would say, going back to, I guess, what I've been saying is that when it says that you are to be a light in the world, that no matter what's going on around you, you choose how you respond, and you should choose how you respond in the way that our Creator would want us to respond. No matter what's going on around you, that's how you remain a light to others.
Let me ask this, and then I know go ahead, Mickey.
Okay, I wanted to add, I think what jumped out at me was without blemish. I think the only person that walked this earth was Christ, that had no blemish. And it's saying that if we grumble, complain, and say all those bad things, then how can we truly represent who Christ is? Like, how can we? He was the only person that walked this earth without blemish. And he said that if you refuse to do those things, then you will be without blemish in the midst of everyone else. Like, you will be that light. You'll be that person that someone look up to. You just be that example, especially in your home.
Wow. Very beautiful. Let me ask you this. Are there times when arguing is necessary? Why or why not? Are there times when arguing is necessary? When you do need to bicker?
I don't think bickering gets anywhere. I mean, in a positive way, yes. Like, if you have something to say, then you can argue your point. But if it gets to the point where it's causing confusion, I think that's when you rest it and try to go back to it. But no, I don't think arguing and bickering is ever okay. If it's in a positive light, yeah.
I was going to ask you to define what you consider to be bickering, because I do think that conflict is necessary. And I think arguing is necessary. And one of the things that a friend and I discussed when our kids were young, we wanted to, we were just talking among ourselves to figure out, do we want our children to see their parents argue? And we both concluded that, yeah, it's okay for them to see them argue, but they also need to see resolution. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Exactly.
So I do think arguing is necessary, but I do want you to define what bickering is, because just to be clear.
Well, bickering has twofold connotation. One is about the nagging part. And the other part of it is where you go tit for tat. You're trying to prove us right. And there's also typically a connotation of, some kind of an insult and hostility within the conversation.
Okay. So I do think that
to put it simple, getting somebody told.
It's like gaslighting.
Yeah.
Getting somebody told. Yeah.
So I do think that conflict is necessary. Arguing is necessary. Bickering is not. Should be avoided.
So disputing and stuff ought to be avoided. Let me finish with this. Again, the book that we're looking at.
I think Mitchie was going to say something.
Oh, go ahead, Mitchie.
Oh, no, it's fine. I was just going to elaborate. It said. I'm good. Go ahead.
The book that we're studying as we come to a close is Seasoned with Grace, God's Recipe for Healthy Family Communication. Again, you can find it at Amazon. It's written by Dr. Robert Davis. Make sure to pick up your copy. I'm going to look at page 64. One of the main parts of this chapter was about creating a positive family communication climate. And I'm going to summarize it just by saying families need to establish a communication atmosphere that fosters healthy communication in all areas of family life. Another way of understanding communication atmosphere is to think about it as a communication climate. Your speech, communication, is the thermostat in your family. Thus, the considerate question we ask ourselves is, what is the communication climate that I am creating within my family? But how does a positive family communication climate or atmosphere even look? Various empirical-based models identify the principles and elements of positive family communication. From these various family functioning models, we gain an understanding of the principles and elements of positive family communication. And I'm just going to skip that bottom part and say that, we create the communication climate. And those of you who are familiar with church knows how the musician and the praise leader sets an atmosphere in the worship service. So when you go into a church, there's a certain atmosphere, and there's an atmosphere during the praise and worship time, but then it's like a completely total atmosphere, and the good ministers of music know how to do it. They create a total different atmosphere during the prayer time and right before the speaker gets up to speak. And you can almost see that shift in the service that takes place. And someone who is skilled in family communication knows how to create a positive family communication climate. Before we close, is there anything else that any of you would like to say about anything we've talked about, especially about the communication climate? Anything anybody else want to share before we go? I want to take this opportunity to thank each of you for tuning in to Unboxed, our virtual book club. When we come back here next week, we will be looking at chapter 5 as we continue to understand what is God's recipe for healthy family communication. Until then, I look forward to seeing you. Have a wonderful night.
Seasoned with Grace, Unboxed also provides healthy relationship training and leadership development for businesses, churches, and community organizations. For a free consultation to discuss your team's needs, please contact us at our website at swg-unboxed.org. That's swg-unboxed.org.